So we'll start things off by taking a look at that very first entry into the series, which is Back to the Future. So, Drew, in case anyone doesn't know, what's that about?
Yes, well, that is exactly how I started my notes off, Scott.
Yes.
Back to the Future does feel like one of those films I don't actually need to describe, having found its way into popular culture in so many ways, in particular as a shorthand for a type or mechanic of time travel. But I am acutely aware, more so by the day, that someone is born every second who hasn't seen it, so perhaps you, dear listener, haven't either. The setup is this. In 1985, in the California town of Hill Valley, Christopher Lloyd's Dr. Emmett Brown, a cross between your typical mad scientist type and a failed inventor, has finally made something that works. A time machine, powered by a device called a flux capacitor. He has housed this machine within an example of the rubbish but striking DMC DeLorean, and created perhaps the most iconic car in film history. To document the first test, Doc Brown enlists the help of his friend, Michael J. Fox's totally a teenager, Marty McFly. No one's buying it, but his short stature helps sell it a little. To operate the video camera, and an astonished Marty watches as the car, and the Doc's dog, disappears before his eyes and then reappears a minute later. Super successful, and only requiring a mere 1.21 gigawatts of electricity per trip, supplied by the everyday hardware store staple of plutonium, which the Doc has ripped off from a group of Libyan terrorists. These Libyans, super pissed and wanting their plutonium back, suddenly appear and shoot down the Doc. Marty flees in the DeLorean and, when he hits the magical speed of 88 miles per hour, disappears, to 30 years earlier. Back in 1955, a bewildered Marty accidentally disrupts the meeting of his parents, causing a rift in the space-time continuum that could destroy the universe. Or maybe just mean he's never born, though for Marty that may be indistinguishable. He then enlists the help of the Doc from 1955 to juice up the DeLorean and get Marty back to the future. Boom, title drop, etc, etc. And turn what at first seems a science fiction adventure into a time-travelling, culture-clash, fish-out-of-water caper with elements of nostalgia, romance, coming-of-age and even alternative history. As with all time travel films, it pays not to think about Back to the Future's technology too much, or, well, at all. If you start asking yourself why not much more has changed in Marty's house when he returns than the furniture and happier parents, when his entire shared family history would be alien to him, then you're going to find the whole thing is a house of cards. All time travel is nonsense, but, well, this film's conceits make a sort of sense on the surface, and the cause and effect stuff it pays attention to, and the general mechanics, are importantly easy to grasp for a broad audience. The likes of Primer may at least appear to have a greater ring of truthiness about them, but they have considerably less joy. Plus, a DeLorean is one hell of a lot more fun than man-sized Tupperware, or whatever that film had. Though, amusingly, the original notion for the time machine in Back to the Future was a fridge of sorts. Like Jaws, Back to the Future is, for me, one of those rare perfect films where there is nothing about it I think it could realistically be improved. While not every joke may land for everyone, while some performances may not be to the taste of all, structurally I think it's nigh on flawless, thanks to Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis' superb script. Everything is set up and paid off, and with no clunky exposition. From the opening scene, even though we may not realise it, we're being fed information that will become relevant later in the film. News stories about the Libyans, old black and white TV episodes, variants of Pepsi, the name of the mayor, the broken clock. All important either to the plot or to set up comedy, but not one with a real lantern hung on it. Rather, all parts of the texture of Hill Valley and Marty's life. There are even references that would pay off in the sequels, but this is thanks to the writer's skills and not some "it was always meant to do a trilogy planning," or bullshit as that is usually called. Bizarrely though, this incredibly well-crafted script managed to be too subtle for some people. Let's call those people idiots. Even people I generally held in reasonable regard like John Gruber of Daring Fireball, who went a bit crazy earlier this year over a YouTube clip called Easter Egg or Thing in the Movie, Lone Pine Mall from Back to the Future, in which the reason for the name change of the shopping mall at the end of the film is spelled out for the hard of thinking. Jeebus. This isn't a lot of people belatedly noticing that creepy wee bastard pointing to his junk at the end of part 3. This is something that was related to significant plot points, action, and crucial locations. But I digress. Easter egg. Sorry, did it again. While Back to the Future may now be further away from us than 1955 was from Marty McFly, I think it still stands up incredibly well, though of course it's difficult for me to be objective about this. However, this will not stop me, and you can consider my recommendation both entirely objective and utterly unassailable.
You know, I think you're probably correct, because there's plenty of films that have kind of been woven into the fabric of our lives for as long as we've known what a life for a film is, and Back to the Future and its follow-ups are kind of one of those sets of films. There's obviously other ones, things like Star Wars, which then I've reappraised in the cold light of day and not found them anything like as good as I did when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But I think Back to the Future holds up just as well. I was really quite happy to go back and see this because I haven't seen it in a good long while, really. But it still really does hold up. Basically, it's a really cleverly written script. It's probably only after you've watched it a couple of times you realise quite how well all these cards are kind of laid out, as you mentioned earlier. But just also, it's quite intelligently done, given that it also features a wide mix of comedy. So there's broad slapstick and all that here, and all of it is done really, really well. People have their moments of kind of slapstick in films that they like. The only one I've ever really liked is Marty tuning up the amplifier at the start of this film and getting blown back across the room by it. It's perfect. And almost everything in it is perfect or setting up something that will be perfect later on in the film, and in some cases in later films as well. It's a really, really well observed, really funny. Crucially, that is, of course, the crucial point is it's incredibly funny. Yeah, Michael J. Fox is terrific in the role. He brings a lot of energy to it, and of course, Christopher Lloyd is absolutely fantastic. Clearly scene stealing, but scene stealing. He's brilliant in it. Both bring just a tremendous amount of energy and drive and enthusiasm to it, and it all just kind of works really well. There's no better comedy coming out of the 80s, I don't think, than this. Even things like Ghostbusters or whatever. I don't think it works as well as this, and this holds up better than it. It's just cleverer. Really great stuff. I'm really happy to go back and watch this again. Cool stuff.
Yeah, I wouldn't compare it to Ghostbusters at all. I like Ghostbusters, but Ghostbusters was fine then and it's fine now. Whereas this is, I really think it's a classic.
Yeah. And
there's a lot of really good stuff in performance and Dean Cundy's photography, and there aren't actually that many effects in it, which is good because some of the special effects don't hold up so well, but it's like at least the design of the car and stuff, really great, really fun. A lot of really good performances, but it's based on this incredible script. It's so well written, and it really does. It just sets up stuff so subtly that you could miss it, but maybe you've taken it in subconsciously. You know, you didn't notice, but your brain did. It's just so well crafted, and yeah, it's really funny, but it's just clever too, and it's just so much fun.
Yeah,
and then you combine that with Christopher Lloyd. That's Doc Brown is one of the classic characters of film. I think he's so recognisable. Christopher Lloyd's so good, and he's still at the whole scene stealing thing, as we were discussing just a couple of months ago, Scott, when he basically as amazing as Bob Odenkirk is in Nobody. Christopher Lloyd managed to almost steal that film from him. Yeah. In his very small role. And yeah, Michael J. Fox is great. You know, and I did mention, like, it's partly exasperation and partly amusement that Hollywood keeps casting people who are nowhere near the age they're supposed to be in these films. I think Michael J. Fox was about 24 when he did this, and he's meant to be 17. Like, well, no, it never works. It's never believable. They just look stupid. But him being shorter maybe helps. But in this film, I just don't care because he's so good in it. He's got some of the best reactions I think I've ever seen. And I was watching some of the Back to the Future extras in the Blu-ray box set this afternoon. Like, and I think it's either Bob Zemeckis or maybe Steven Spielberg, who was a producer in this, had said, you know, like, it said that great acting is reacting. I'm not sure 100% how true that is, but this is a pretty good staking the ground for the reacting thing, because his reactions are so good, and there's so much of the comedy comes from that. And it's another of those films, that that could have been so different if it had the the cast
Eric
originally.
Stoltz.
Eric Stoltz. I mean, they'd wanted Michael J. Fox from the beginning, but he was tied up with Family Ties on TV. Couldn't get out of the contract, and they shot 5 weeks with Eric Stoltz. And they're saying, he's a fine actor, but he's just not got the vibe for this character. And then they were so committed to Michael J. Fox that they got funded from the studio to basically throw away 5 weeks of filming.
Yeah.
But I'm glad they did, because it's fantastic. It's just, he's so good. He works so well with Christopher Lloyd. Leah Thompson's great. Crispin Glover's suitably odd.
Yes.
Which is partly why he's cast. But it gives George McFly this kind of slightly weird character.
Yeah.
And then it's just one of those films as well that's so very, very fun. I mean, it's not like it's not taking itself seriously, but it's not like kind of pole-faced either. It's like enough sort of belief in the situation for it to work. And then Christopher Lloyd was directed to like for the doc to absolutely believe everything he was saying. He's playing that dead straight, which is what provides a lot of the comedy as well. And then again, Marty's reaction to him too. But it's like the fun stuff, like Marty invented both rock and roll and skateboarding.
Yeah.
I just love those wee touches. It's something that I think must have tickled Robert Zemeckis, because it's a heavy chunk of that in Forrest Gump, which he did about 9 years after this, of like people being involved with the history and stuff. I guess it comes from you, but it's fun. And even from the beginning, it's having a wee bit of fun, because some of the music's done by Huey Lewis and the News. And the start of the film has Huey Lewis and it's saying, "Oh, this music's rubbish and it's too loud."
Yeah.
When he's playing his music, I was like, okay, there's the nice sense of fun in this film all the way through, without ever being too arch. So yeah, this is, again, it's like one of the reasons I'm saying Scott, it was hard for me to reject it, because I've never gone more than probably a handful of years before watching this again. I've always just loved this film. But it stands up. It's so well made, it's so fun that you can't really not love it, surely. It's such a great film.
Yes. I don't. We've been talking for about 15 minutes of this, and not to mention Thomas F. Wilson, I don't think. But I love Biff as well.
He's great, yeah.
Another really iconic sort of dumb bully character is just great in this and all the subsequent films. Really great. I know it's kind of had a little bit of stick by people who were, that whole kind of inventing rock and roll thing. I get you could maybe take that the wrong way if you're really taking this as a serious film. There's something that seriously happened. No, I don't think there's any mean-spirited in any of this, even though there's a whole John Mulaney stand-up routine about it. Yes, it's a kind of a slightly weird film if you think of him invented time travel and basically then has to stop his mum from falling in love with him, is a strange pitch for an elevator pitch for a film, but it does not come across anything like that way when you actually watch the film of it at all. It's just so, pretty much wholesome in a long way. I mean, that's the worst thing that happens to people, is they're getting covered in manure at the end of it. It's all just really lighthearted, and at the same time it takes itself seriously enough for the kind of emotion of it to actually work as well as the comedy beats of it. So it's just really great.
Yeah. If there is one reservation I have with the film, and it's perhaps worse because you were mentioning Thomas F. Wilson. Apparently he's basically very much the opposite of Biff in real life, but he was told to play it dead straight as well. But there is one bit where it's getting a bit rapey.
True. Yeah.
It's the one bit of the film I really don't like, and it doesn't. But it's in that kind of area when he's been a bit too forceful with Lorraine, and it's slightly uncomfortable with that. And nothing happens. It's the fact it's there at all, I don't like. Because it's relating to the hero moment, but it's I don't know. It feels like it just edges slightly too far. And honestly, basically my only complaint about the film is that. Because the rest of it's so fun. Just we're talking about things that might have been as well with Eric Stoltz and then like the original idea of how to get the energy at the end was to run the DeLorean into an atomic bomb test, which quite glad they didn't do it. Only they didn't do that in the end because they didn't have the money for it, but then it worked so much better because and that's again listening to watching these extras this afternoon, and Bob Zemeckis was talking about that's good because it meant that the history actually tied into Hill Valley, because an atomic bomb drop, then all the world knew exactly when that happened, whereas it was very, you had to know that this thing was going to happen at this time in the town you were in. The other interesting potential change is that Sid Sheinberg, the head of Universal at the time, apparently had a single note about the film. Whereas, executives very often stick their oar in. He had one single note, which was about the title. Apparently he was confused by the title and thought audience users would be too, and suggested they call it Spacemen from Pluto.
What?
Yeah.
I mean, what?
Yeah. So that's amusing, but I kind of like how Steven Spielberg dealt with it. Apparently Bob Zemeckis went to him and was like, Steven, you've got to do something, we can't do this. Steven Spielberg said, we all really liked Sid Sheinberg, and if he'd been one of those executives, or at least in this film, had been given him lots and lots of notes, you could sort of pick and choose.
Yeah.
But he was like this guy they really liked, but he only gave them one note about the whole film, and it was about the title. So Steven Spielberg said he sent his note to him saying, thanks for your note this morning. It's good to know you've got such a good sense of humour. It all gave us a really good laugh. We really needed that because we're coming to complete the film. And apparently he never mentioned it again. So that's quite a diplomatic way to handle that. Yeah. One other thing I'd like to mention, so you mentioned at the beginning, Scott, the posters. Yes, I mentioned that very recently in other films about how censored it was, because modern film posters in general are garbage.
Yeah.
Whereas the classic Drew Struzan poster for Back to the Future is fantastic. It just gets it's got so many of the elements of the film in it, and it has the tone just spot on, just in that poster.
Yeah.
It's great.
It's a great poster in itself, and for a series that has this many running gags, the fact that the posters themselves are also running gags, I think is just fantastic. Really ties everything together. Just brilliant. Love them.
Yeah, I think Back to the Future is maybe one of those films that you've probably picked up enough of that you probably know the general gist without having seen it. But if you haven't, I still recommend doing so, because it's such an entertaining film. It's so good-hearted as well. And don't be put the whole idea of the sort of mother-son romance thing. It's a fairly small. It's not small in importance, but fairly small in terms of running time, and it's solved in a quite wholesome way.
Yeah,
in a way that it's that sort of works in that situation, and without having been any way creepy or anything. Although you can see at the time why Disney turned it down, because that was it was that scene that made Disney turn it down when they were looking for a studio at the time.